Alright guys, we're back staring at my engine bay, and in this video we are going to talk about wastegate duty cycle. Wastegate duty cycle is another one of those parameters that we tend not to focus on a lot when we're looking at our logs, but it can be really telling to help you understand how much capacity you have in the system, how healthy everything is, and just give you a good understanding for how strong things are. So I think it's a really important thing to understand, so let's go ahead and hop right into it. So a lot of you know that the way a turbo works is that exhaust gases flow through the exhaust manifold and through the exhaust side of the turbo, and it spins that wheel. And that wheel spins the wheel on the intake side so that it can basically suck in more air, create positive pressure, and force more air into the engine to create more horsepower. Now, as you get higher in the RPMs, those exhaust gases are going to speed up. And as those exhaust gases speed up, it's going to create more boost. So the wheel's going to spin faster, the intake wheel is going to suck in more air and create more and more airflow being shoved into the engine. Now, this isn't always what you want to do. You don't want to run as much boost as the turbo can make at all times. It might hit the limits of the turbo or your engine, or maybe you just want to be able to control it to have like a lower boost setting. So that's where a wastegate comes into play. So the wastegate on our cars is basically a flap or a hole on the side of the turbo, and that allows some of those exhaust gases to basically bypass the exhaust wheel and go straight into the downpipe. On some aftermarket systems, like if you have a big boost turbo kit, you might have an external wastegate, and it operates the exact same. It'll bypass air completely around the turbo and just route it directly into your exhaust. Now, by doing this, you're basically limiting how fast the exhaust wheel is spinning so that you limit how much boost the car is making. And that's where your primary form of boost control is coming from. So if we come around here, you can see on my car, I still have the stock electronic wastegate. There it is right there. It's plugged into the car. And then there's an arm that extends to the flap underneath this turbo blanket on my exhaust housing. And that's the same way that it works on the stock turbo. You'll see that there's basically the electronic wastegate, an arm that stretches out to the exhaust side of the turbo, and then that's where the actual flap is. Now, the term duty cycle implies that the system is oscillating like it has an on and off switch. So if you're at 50% duty cycle, it's on 50% of the time and off 50% of the time. This applies more to like older systems that have pneumatic boost control, because there's basically a spring inside of the wastegate that's pushing against your boost reference, and the spring can bounce in and out and oscillate a little bit. In our cars, since we have an electronic wastegate, it can be fine-tuned. So at 50% duty cycle, it's open halfway. At 75% duty cycle, it's open 25% of the way. And at 100% duty cycle, it's completely closed. Now, this level of control is really key to making our cars operate really well. You can have 100% wastegate duty cycle as the car is building up boost so that it gets up to your boost target as quickly as possible. And then you can begin to open up the wastegate so that it holds your target boost pressure. And again, all of this is dialed into your tune. If you have an off-the-shelf map or a custom tune, there's going to be base mapping for your boost control that targets a specific wastegate duty cycle throughout the rev range. So that's what gives you the improved drivability, the increased spool, and the nice wide torque band as you're driving your car. Now, this boost control isn't always perfect. A lot of times you can run into slight issues where it needs to be adjusted away from the base wastegate duty cycle mapping. So that's where your PIDs come into play. Those give you a little bit more of finer control so that you can make adjustments to reach boost quicker and hold boost more steadily. However, that's not always enough either. And so a lot of other times you can run into different things that the car does to react to, varying boost conditions. A common condition is overboost, and that means that you're going over your boost target, even though your wastegate duty cycle is right on target, and that's going to cause you to have a throttle closure. And if you're curious what a throttle closure is, I've made a video on that, so definitely check that out if you need more information there. In other instances, you might be below your boost target, and so your wastegate duty cycle again is right on track. Your PIDs are doing everything they can, but you're still way below your boost target. And I see this a lot on off-the-shelf maps. For whatever reason, they just target really high amounts of boost, but especially higher up in the rev range, the turbo just can't keep up and it begins to drop away from your target. So it's really up to you to work with your tuner to understand if there are any issues here. Again, the more that you tune these cars and understand what wastegate duty cycle typically translates to in terms of boost and PSI, this can help you have a better understanding for how well the car is running. I think the easiest way to understand wastegate duty cycle is it's a description for how hard the turbo is working. So for example, on my car, when we were custom tuning, we kept adding boost, turning up the wastegate duty cycle, but there was a certain point where it wasn't responding the way that we expected. It seemed like the boost should have been going up a lot more than it was, and it almost seemed like it was stalling out. And so my tuner gave me that information, and I was able to go through the car and actually identify that I had a really bad exhaust leak. After I heat cycled the car a couple times, I forgot to double check all my bolts, and some of them had actually started backing off, and that caused my exhaust manifold gasket to blow out. So when I fixed that, everything went back to where we expected, and it was just a much better performing turbo. So check if you have that kind of issue. Look for boost leaks, look for exhaust leaks. Just make sure that there's nothing allowing air to escape, and that can basically cause your turbo to have to work harder to hit the same boost target. Another thing is a lot of people ask me about my intake on my turbo kit, and they tell me, wow, that's restrictive, it's robbing you of power, when really, again, that's not the case. My tune is perfectly dialed in for my system and basically hitting a limit because of my clutch. So the only advantage I would get by putting a bigger filter on my turbo is that it wouldn't have to work as hard to hit the same boost targets. So it's going to allow it to be a more higher flowing system, so that way I have more room to continue turning up the turbo. So in my case, if I had room to add a bigger filter, or if I just removed my filter completely and put like, a turbo guard on it, then that would lower the wastegate duty cycle that I need to hit the same amount of boost and the same amount of airflow. And especially if you're one of those people that are pushing your car really hard and you're up in like the 90-95% wastegate duty cycle range, adding a bigger filter, increasing the size of your piping, and just smoothing out the airflow throughout your system will help drop that wastegate duty cycle so that you have more room to add more boost and continue turning up the car. So again, just trying to think of it as how hard your turbo is working is a good way to think about it. And if you want more room, or you just want to reduce stress on the system, then improving the airflow and efficiency of your system is where you're going to get that back. Another thing to keep in mind is wastegate duty cycle is not like a straight line when you're looking at it compared to boost. If you think about the way that the flap is, as it gets more and more closed, there's kind of exponentially less air that can flow out of there. So wide open, of course, is no boost, but even 50 or 60% is letting out a lot of air. So it's going to be a really low boost. But as you get up towards like 70 and maybe 80% wastegate duty cycle on the stock turbo, that's where it really starts creating a restriction that forces air over the exhaust wheel and creates boost. So don't think that 1% duty cycle is 1 PSI or something even like that. There's a curve to it. So you'll kind of have to play with it if you're getting a custom tune to determine what duty cycle relates to a specific amount of boost. So yeah, I think that sums it up. Again, hopefully I answered all of your questions, but if you have any additional questions about wastegate duty cycle, feel free to leave a comment below and I'll try to get back to you. Outside of that, I think that's it. So thank you guys for watching, and I hope this helps. And if you have any other questions or comments, leave them down below.